Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here and to see you after all this time.
I am so excited to see you. I've always really admired your work and just love the way that you bring such passion and such expertise to brain health. But for our audience, could you just tell our audience and share with them sort of who you are, what you do, but also I think for me, the question that continues to fascinate me when I interview my podcast guests is how did you get here? What led you to this place where you are specializing in brain health?
Sure. So I'm a registered nurse and a manual osteopath by training. And really, I help people. I like to call myself a brain crusader.
Love
And
that.
I help people reclaim their brain health, whether it's post concussion, older head injuries, or even premature memory loss, just when things aren't quite right. I could really help people get back on track and see that there is a better way to live. There's a better state of brain health there for you. And sometimes you don't even realize it until you're feeling it. And my journey was definitely a windy road, which sometimes it is, but I swear I came out of the womb a helper. Like
So interesting.
I've always been a helper. All of my wishes on the wishing well was always about like humanity and solving world hunger and stuff like that. So it's in my soul to want to help people. And I started in nursing, but really in around 2013 when I had my own memory scare, that's when my passion for brain health was born. So even though I was a helper, I didn't quite know my mission, I would say. And then the mission was really born in around 2012, 2013.
And that's when you sort of had your own experience, right? And I'm a very firm believer that our own experiences and our own stories around often what we do is really what can fuel that mission and really what can sort of intensify the passion with which we carry out that mission.
Absolutely.
So I'd love for you to share with our audience and perhaps where we can dive in our, of course, I'm going to ask you about kind of the mental health,
Mhm.
the emotional challenges, right? I'm curious how concussions and how brain health can really affect us on an emotional level and in terms of our mental health. Is there a connection between those two? And kind of what does that look like?
Absolutely. And I think there are so many layers here because with a concussion or, if your brain isn't working optimally, it can affect your mood, your irritability, even like outbursts and anger can be harder to sort of control. But then with a concussion, you're also sensitive to stimulus, right? Whether
Mm.
it be light, sometimes it's noise, you have fatigue, so you might not be able to engage with others around you. So, I think this is actually a really interesting topic to address with you because, in terms of relationships, I see the challenges in my patients where their partner wants to help, but maybe doesn't know how, or
Hmm.
offers help, and the patient will say, "Oh, I just need some space," but really they do need help, but they just don't know how to verbalize it. So there are just so many layers to this.
Yeah, and I can imagine. And it's something that, in my time when I was working with couples, when I was practicing psychotherapy, it was certainly something that I would see, right? Like if one part of the couple system was struggling with anything, didn't really
Any
matter
chronic illness or yeah.
anything,
Mhm.
right? And then it's sort of how do you navigate that as a couple? What does the other partner do? How do you ask for your needs? How do all of those sorts of pieces?
Absolutely. And sometimes we don't accept help when we need it. We're afraid to say, "Yes, actually I'm struggling." So that definitely plays a role.
Can you tell us about some of the perhaps more unique challenges that you might see come up when you are treating brain health, when you're treating concussions, or what was the other piece you called it? Like later brain injuries? Is that what you called it?
Oh, yeah. So when maybe you sustained a few concussions in high school when you were playing sports, And then later on, you notice some changes. And of course, we can't say, yes, for sure it was those early concussions, but we do say legacy concussions. And so you notice, you're not doing as well as you could. And because I have a subpopulation of people from the martial arts community, like MMA fighters, so I will see it in them, right?
Yes.
They'll be, and what's really interesting is they will seek out care not for themselves because they recognize they are not performing optimally in the family unit, right? They notice
Interesting.
that they are angry or irritable and just not doing well. So I think that's interesting for sure. And then with more recent concussions, I will say a really interesting thing is this fatigability and intolerance to stimuli. So when you're in a relationship, you want to spend time with the other person, maybe watch TV, right?
Mhm.
A lot of the things we do involve, especially right now, involve stuff that people with a concussion can't really tolerate. And so I've seen this where the injured person, is trying to navigate. Okay, how do I not make my partner feel bad, but also I have to look after myself because if I watch this show, I'm going to struggle for the next 3 days. So the
Right. And
skills that
so
you teach are actually so valuable here, right?
yeah, and it's interesting. Do you think you're like, do your patients identify these challenges for themselves? Like you were saying with your MMA population, right? Which I actually think is really fascinating. You got to tell our audience about your background with that. But with your MMA population, they are identifying for themselves that there is a strain happening at home. There's an emotional or relational strain at home, and that's what's prompting them to seek treatment. Is that what you're
Yes,
noticing?
absolutely. And the partner will always validate it too, right? And sometimes it is the partner that kind of gives the little push to come into the office, not to generalize, but um, the men still, especially that generation, so would be retired MMA fighters, are not always seeking out the care. So things have to get really bad before they show up in my office.
Right, right. And can you give us a sense of, what sorts of interventions, what sort of tools and strategies are you using? And I think for my audience, they would probably be really interested in particular, to support with some of those emotional pieces. Like how I would imagine there's some level of supporting your patient in self-regulation.
Yes, absolutely. And it's actually interesting because so definitely there will be someone who deals more like you would have, and I will always refer to have them have that psychological support, for lack of a better word. And then
Hmm.
I will come at it from sort of a brain exercise point of view. How can we stimulate the area of the brain that is involved in emotion regulation, let's say?
Hmm.
How can we flush blood to that area? How can we bring health to the brain, which would be, I always say it's simple but not easy. How do we change the diet? Right? What do we do for mindfulness, right? Calming
Hmm.
down.
Hmm.
And then some brain exercises that actually will strengthen that ability to not react. Okay,
Hmm.
strengthening what we would call like inhibition instead of always being in reaction.
Can you say more about that? I think that's really fascinating. And I love that you said simple but not easy. I say that about almost every single intervention I use. I'm like,
Right.
it's not
Yes.
it's not rocket science. It's simple,
Yes.
but it's not
Yes.
easy, right? Because it requires
Exactly.
that
Yes.
consistency and that practice. And yeah.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly. It's the consistency because you have to keep doing it day after day. So, yes, right now, even concussion, not concussion, we are in a reactive world, right? Shiny object. The phones, all technologies are designed for us to react and press a button. And that is primitive. Our primitive reflex is if a light goes off, is for us to look at it because when we were living in the jungle, that would mean it was a predator, right?
Right.
And so we actually have to um, be effortful, if that's a word, in training our inhibition, our ability to
Right.
not react. And I will use simple I have an app actually that I use, and literally when the light goes off, you have to not look at it and you have to do something
Interesting.
else. It seems so simple, but a lot is going on there, right?
A lot is
It's
going
like
on
the
there.
notification went off. I want you to not look at that notification. I
And what
want
are you
you to do
training? Like from
something
a
else.
brain health perspective?
It really is a frontal lobe. It's the
I
frontal
see.
lobe,
Mhm.
um, that sort of fires up. And so I'm just strengthening, and it it's so crazy because it is so simple, but it's not easy. I'm literally training the don't look at that notification skill,
Right,
right?
right.
And then in the same way, you would train okay, I'm upset, but I'm not going to react. It's all the
Mhm.
same pathways, right? That we're
It is. Absolutely. That's why I've always been really fascinated with what you do, Melissa. It's for that reason, right? Like I see sort of the parallels between how you're trained. Like when you talk about training out of reactivity, I love that because that's so much of what I do with the women that I work with is I train them to not be reactive necessarily to facial expressions or tones of voice, but really to choose how we want to respond. So I find that really fascinating that you do that with brain health as well, is that you're training the brain to pause, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly it.
Is that it? Right? To sort of like of course you notice it. It's not like you don't notice the notification go off,
But you're
but you
not
are
so
actually
compelled,
right.
right?
So I have a question for you because interesting that you talk about notifications. One of the things I have done on my cell phone is I actually don't receive any notifications other than text messages, right?
Okay.
And really the only people that have my cell phone number are like my family and close friends, right?
Mhm.
So other than that, I don't receive any notifications. And I've done that purposely because I don't want to be reactive and I don't want to be distracted and all of those sorts of
Yes.
things. So what I do is when I want to check email or I want to check social media, I have to be intentional about that,
Yes. I love
right?
that.
Yeah. But what you've said though has kind of made me think. Um, I've basically removed the stimulus,
Mhm.
right? I've taken the
True.
stimulus, like I've removed it. So I'm
Yes.
not really training myself to pause instead of reacting. I've just like taken it's okay. This is how I think
Yes.
about it.
No, I know
You
what
know what
you're
I'm saying?
saying.
It's like
And I
junk
don't
food,
know
right?
what's
It's like
better
if we
because
remove all the junk food
yes,
from our house, then we're
I
not really training ourselves to like whatever. You know what I'm saying?
that's true. But I would say if you were really weak in that area, you would probably find another way to check the notifications,
Okay.
right? Like
Okay.
you'd say, actually, I'm just going to log in on my computer,
Yes.
even though it
Okay.
won't show up on my phone, right?
Right. Right. Right.
So, I don't think there's anything wrong with the way you've done it. That's for sure. I'm actually the same. Um, I only get text messages and I try and keep my ringer off, just to be intentional
Yeah.
about what I'm doing.
Yeah. And I find it's made a huge difference for me. And I can't remember how long it's been since I've done that. It was you know what? I made the decision, particularly with my emails, um, several years ago. I think I was still a solopreneur, right? It was before I had even hired a team and hired clinicians and this and that. It was just me and so maybe that was part of it. I didn't have any support in terms of like answering client emails and things like that, and I would feel very emotionally activated if I picked up my phone and there were like 56 emails, right?
Of
That
course,
little
of course.
that little app is like 56
Yes,
with a little, letter icon. Like that would just it would sort of get me worked up and then it was hard for me to remain present, for whatever I had to do next. So I think that's when I implemented that for myself, but it's a very interesting it's interesting to hear that you use these sorts of strategies as part of really optimizing brain health.
absolutely. And you know what? I think we have been trained to think that we need to reply to that email. But if one thing COVID has taught us is like emails don't need to be replied to right away.
Right.
Usually it's not a life and death situation.
Yes.
And so it really is okay. Do your emails twice a day or whatever it is.
Yes.
And I think we're more efficient that way, right?
I
Instead of
agree.
you're at the gym and between sets, you're like,
Yeah.
no more.
Yeah, no more, no more. I totally agree with you. I'm curious, when you're training people that particular skill in terms of pausing and not being so reactive, do you see, is there a trickle effect for that particular skill? Like, do you see your patients then using that slowing down, let's not be so reactive in other areas of their life as well?
I will say that because, or at least I theorize, because we're flushing blood to that frontal lobe, what will happen is a greater sense of well being will happen.
Hmm.
Right. So while we're working out, trying to work one mechanism that's right next to other mechanisms, right? It's not like a button where I'm
Yep.
only working the red button. So what, and I think probably once you get some sense of control, you just, you feel a lot better.
Right, right. Of course. Yeah, I can imagine. Um, can we? I've got a few more questions, of course,
Yeah,
that I want to
absolutely.
ask you, but what I'd love, I don't have this one listed down, but I'd love for you to tell me and my audience about your app. I've been so
Oh,
curious
yes,
about your app and like, how does it work and what does it
sure.
do?
So it's called Brain Toolkit, and it can be used. I use it with my concussion patients, but it really is for anyone who wants to sort of tickle their brain. And there are some exercises that really focus on the eyes. And then there's a memory one, a concentration one where there's like conflicting stimuli and you have to choose the right answer. So, definitely areas that we can all benefit from working. And there are little help like buttons. So when you go in, it suggests where you start with them. And then if you want to reach the next level, work with a practitioner. But these, for example, you know how I was saying we work the inhibition, those eye exercises are actually in there. So it's a very simple way. That's like my motto as well, right? A simple way to work the brain. There are
Right,
lots of
right.
apps out there that are flashy and complex, and you get coins and stuff like that. And this is very much bringing back to basics.
Mhm, mhm, and I think through, like, your social media channels and things like that, I've seen you post about some of the exercises, and they've always looked really interesting, right? Can you describe maybe, like, one of the exercises that you
Sure.
use inside your app?
So, for example, one way to work focus or attention is actually to look at a dot. How simple is that? Put a
Mhm.
dot on your wall and see how long you can stare at it. So I do have one that is literally that, but there's a little circle around it which gives you feedback because as soon as your attention breaks, the circle appears. And when you're
Interesting.
focused, the circle disappears. It's an
Uh-huh.
optical illusion.
Right.
Actually, can I share a link?
Absolutely, you can.
Okay,
Yeah, and we'll also link it in the show notes for
Oh,
sure.
okay,
Yes.
perfect. And
Yeah.
then a hidden link is braintoolkit.ca/level up. And there are
Okay.
a couple exercises there to work attention, which I think everybody needs right now.
Oh, that would be amazing. You know what? We'll make sure. I don't know if we have that one, but we'll make
I'll
sure
send
we
it. I'll
add
send it.
it. Yeah, for sure. We'll add it to the show notes so that everyone yeah, I just think it's so neat. Like I've been watching you as you've been developing the app and you've
Thank you.
released it and I just think it's such a great way to really support the work that you're doing.
Well, and the eyes are the brain, right? So we say it's the window to the soul, the window to the brain, but the eyes actually are the brain. So we really can use them as a lever for help.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. Okay. And what I'd love to do now is just shift gears for a moment to
Sure.
support people, right? We kind of touched on that. I know whenever I have worked with people around anything related to concussions or brain health, usually I'm working with the support people in that person's life, right? And so, what I'd love for you to share is, if there are people listening today from my particular audience and they are supporting someone that's perhaps struggling with their brain health, what are some ways that they can offer support, that would actually be useful and that would actually be helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. I think offering it is just being, what can I do to help you? Is one, like the big question. And then asking about specific strategies. Like, is there anything specific I can do that would make your, your day easier, whether it is picking up meals, right? Because going to a grocery store is often overstimulating. So, offering support and offering again, because we are so bad at accepting help, right?
Right. So not
So,
just making that offer once, but
yes,
reaching
really
out
revisiting it.
again.
And
Yeah.
people also through their journey will be ready to accept help at different times. So sometimes you might say no, and then you realize, oh, you know what? I really could use someone to go to the grocery store for me,
Mhm,
right?
mhm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's one of the things also that I do like to teach women is that often these sorts of conversations are ones that we want to revisit, whether we're practicing assertiveness or whether we're making ourselves available to play that supportive role. Is that often these shifts in dynamics don't happen in one conversation, but they happen after several conversations. And I imagine it's no different for your patients.
Absolutely. And also being open or offering activities that are low stimulus. Like, do you want to go for a walk? Or I want to spend time with you, but what is something that you're able to do?
I
So
like that.
meeting them instead of saying, oh, let's go watch a TV show, or so putting the control sort of in the injured person's hand, I think would really make a difference.
And I like the way you worded that. It's leading with I want to spend time with you. So it's not necessarily I want to watch a movie or let's watch or let's listen to music or whatever it is. It's I want to spend time with you. What's the best way that we can do that? I really like that
Yes,
way of sort of framing the question and kind of inviting that other person in.
I agree.
Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think that is so helpful. And it's again, I've always found the work that you do fairly unique in terms of the expertise that you bring to brain health. So what I'd love for you to share now is just where can our audience go to find you? I know you've mentioned your brain toolkit. We will definitely link to that, but where are some other places that people can go to find you?
Sure. So on Instagram, I'm the.rehab.lab. And I also have a group on Facebook called Concussed Now What? And you can find me in there, whether you have a concussion or not. Just join the group. And then, should you ever need me, I'm there. But I actually post a lot of things for general brain health as well.
Amazing. Melissa, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. This was so fun.